Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Core Direction Chearful webinar this afternoon. It's the second in the series that we have going for May, which coincidentally happens to be Mental Health Awareness Month, which is a wonderful time for us to all have these types of webinars. We will start. We're just going to give about a minute or so more, and we'll start off our session today on building resilience.
I'll make a start because I'm aware of everybody's time and people might need to get off straight away at 1 p.m. My name's Dr. Kayleigh Sumner. I'm a psychologist and I'm delighted to be here with you today to talk about a very fascinating and important topic on building resilience. It is an area that I would consider myself knowledgeable about, which is why I'm here talking about it today on behalf of Chearful. I actually did my PhD in this area. And what I was very interested in is how do we build resilience in childhood and adulthood? What are some of those fundamental factors that contribute towards our resilience? And I really explored an avenue around mindset and growth mindset in my research. So I wanted to share that with you today. So if we just have a look at the agenda, I will go through some of the key items, and then Priya will talk us through some housekeeping reminders for the course of this seminar. So the topic, building resilience, we're going to be looking at, firstly, why are we talking about it? Why is it drawing so much attention in the world, in the media right now, and in organizations worldwide? What is it? What is this mysterious concept that we speak now so much about? And how do we build it? Which is ultimately why we're here to think about, okay, what are some of the key factors that help to contribute positively towards our resilience?
Okay, so just thanks, Kayleigh. Just to continue on, before we actually continue with the presentation itself, just some housekeeping rules. We love questions, so please feel free to put your questions in the chat and we will make every effort to answer every single one of them by the end of the session today. And use the chat for asking questions as well as giving comments or feedback and responding. And if you want any further information from Dr. Kayleigh or from Chearful, anything at all on the topic, you can always reach us at contact@chearful.com, and we are happy to respond to you with any with as much as we can. And with that, I'm going to leave it to Dr. Kayleigh to continue on with the presentation.
Thank you, Priya. Okay, so not that it necessarily needs a justification, but I feel it's important that we know how resilience can impact us in a working environment. So that's really the focus of today. It's a very broad concept. There's lots of different avenues we could go down and think about, but we're really thinking about it broadly in the sense of resilience in a working capacity and a working environment, and we will be touching upon aspects of individual resilience as well, all in this 20-minute whistle-stop tour. So one of the things that's really important when we're drawing attention to resilience is to point out that it's actually one of the key factors that helps us achieve success. So it's really a fundamental ingredient to how we navigate life. So we should know more about this, and we should also be teaching this in schools, and we should also be putting this on the agenda in the workplace, and all be able to reflect upon, okay, where are we with our resilience? Where do we feel we're at, and where do we want to go? And there's this new concept known as resilient organizations. And what the research is starting to show that organizations that would consider themselves resilient because of where they place well-being and mental health, they find that staff are able to handle challenges. There is improved communication within the organisation. It reduces burnout, understandably. Improved relationships. We'll see a collaborative ethos and also health benefits. So you won't have staff members feeling so run down, burnt out, and sick. We know when people experience prolonged levels of stress over a period of time, we become sick because it attacks our immune system, amongst many other things. So it's actually a really key concept to think about positive mental well-being. Is resilience is fundamental to that. So let's start with a little bit of engagement and a quick quiz. Now, no need to worry because we're not scoring up the answers. It's just really to start thinking about the concept, thinking about what we know, a little bit of myth busting, because there are a lot of myths around resilience. So question number 1, if you just type your answer in the chat box, and feel free to wave a hand up for yes also. So this is a yes or a no question. So resilient people work independently and do not need help from others. Yes or no? Mm-hmm. So I feel that's quite a resounding no from the audience here, that no, resilient people don't necessarily work independently and they do actually need help from others. Yes, so that statement was a myth because what we know is resilient people are able to take on feedback, and they can also take on board criticism and work through that and move through that. And help from others is essential to that process. Number 2, resilience is about concealing our emotions. Yes or no? Absolutely. It's not about concealing our emotions. It's being able to acknowledge, process them, and move on from what we're currently experiencing. So, absolutely, the crowd is great at this myth busting quiz. Question number 3 is resilience is a skill that can be developed. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It is a skill that can be developed. Essentially, why we're all here today to think about what is it that supports us to develop resilience. So, when we're thinking about what resilience is, it is quite a broad concept, and it's something that could be debatable. But if we're going to take a scan of the literature in general, what you hear a lot about resilience is it's our ability to bounce back after an adverse event. And to a large part, that is true. But what we're discovering now, and also what we understood as a result of so many things we experienced during the pandemic, is that it's also resilience is about a period of transformation. So we might not necessarily bounce back to the place we was before, because we'll have a new insight and a new perspective, but it's about being able to move through adversity using healthy coping mechanisms. And we could get two people experiencing the exact same event and respond to it in very different ways. And that is truly the fundamental question around resilience is, okay, how can some people find it easier per se to cope and muster on through challenge, and some people find that more difficult. So when we're defining resilience, essentially it's the psychological ability to cope when things get difficult. That's how we're defining it for the course of this mini webinar. So let's go on to have a look how we actually develop it, which is a multifaceted approach, and there are different things that we could discuss around developing resilience, or how we split it up into some basics that we need to cover, the mindset that we need to have, some skills we need to have, and habits. So if we look at the basics, firstly, are the basics in place? Maslow developed hierarchy of needs. I'm sure many of you would have heard of it in terms of a business sense. So if we just move to the next slide, what we'll see is what Maslow said is, for the resilience to be in place, for our level of happiness in life, for our satisfaction in life, we need to have physiological needs met first, and also our safety needs met. And without those foundations, we can't achieve optimal happiness or satisfaction, as he coined it, self-actualization. And so it's so important that we have those foundational needs in place. And it sounds very simple, because what happens is we sometimes think that we need something really complex to solve the way we're feeling or what's going on for us in our lives. But often it's just going back to those basics and looking, are these in place? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I getting the right nutritional balance in my diet? Am I eating? And those two fundamental questions, if we can't confidently answer, around 70% yes, then that will absolutely be hindering our resilience and our ability to cope and respond. But what do we know when faced with adverse events? We find it difficult to sleep, and sometimes that does affect our appetite. So then we have this cycle. When we're thinking about being our optimal selves, it's really important, are those physiological needs met, and do we feel safe in our environment? Those are the two things we would ever need to move up the hierarchy further. Another important concept is mindset, and this is something that came up in my research time and time again, and it's something that we're able to have a sense of control of ourselves. And I'm sure many of you would have heard of growth mindset, which was developed by a lady called Carol Dweck. Now, she looked at this for decades. She was researching this, and the very question, why do some people persist in the face of challenge and other people actually find it very challenging and retreat? So this is what she came up with around mindsets, and what she found is that people who demonstrate increased resilience are the ability to move through adversity with healthy coping mechanisms, have this internal dialogue of a growth mindset. And as a disclaimer, we all have a growth and a fixed mindset. It's a spectrum, and we move through it depending on what the specific task is that we're doing, what the specific challenge is. So it's not simply a black and white scenario. However, what we can learn to do, which will really help us increase our resilience, is be aware of when we're in a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. Just take, for example, if I was someone that found it really, really tricky to do a maths equation quickly in my head. So when confronted with a maths challenge or a maths task, I might just automatically disengage, because my internal dialogue is, oh, I can't do this, I can't do maths. And then immediately I'm not going to put in any effort and I'm going to avoid the tasks. That's just one example of how actually the mindset and the way you're thinking about something will really have a huge impact on behavior. So as we can see some of the differences between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset, we become threatened when somebody else is successful. And of course, jealousy is a normal emotion, but how are we able to manage that and deal with that and reframe it to say, okay, what can I do to actually, what can I take from this person to increase my own successes? As the growth mindset is doing, finding inspiration from that. And there's also with a fixed mindset a desire to look smart all the time. And that can be really difficult and anxiety provoking for us because we don't want to ever disprove that theory or show vulnerability, which means that we're then operating in high anxiety states. So there's so much we could touch upon on the growth mindset. There really, really is. It's a huge area, and this is something that can really make a difference if we're just firstly aware of what some of our thoughts are before going into specific challenges and before going into tasks, because that really is going to influence the way we respond to it and our resilience levels around it. So when we're looking at specific skills, so skills to build, so we looked at basics, mindset, and now some skills. So being careful with setting expectations of yourself and others. That's sort of number one. Are our expectations aligned with reality? Or as much as reality that they can be, so that we're not constantly feeling disappointed. It's important that we have high expectations, but we need them also to be realistic. And also expecting change so that you are ready to adapt. One of the things that we find humans find it most difficult to deal with is actually change. Change is really tough for, I would say, the majority of people. Straight away, we will become defensive, we'll become resistant because change is a threat. We're moving out of our zone of safety and from what we know. So it's not possible for us all the time to be okay with change, but the more we can accustom ourselves to the one thing that we are certain of is that change will happen. So that level of acceptance that change is likely to happen can help us with that process and our resilience factors. An example of this is that when we accept something, there's a study we do, and we do some training with school staff on well-being, and every year we do this experiment where there's a ticking clock. So we ask the staff to firstly, as they're listening to the ticking clock, think that they wish the sound wasn't there. Notice the sound and wish that the sound wasn't there and that wasn't happening. And then we ask them to put themselves in a different mindset of accepting the sound and just accepting and just listening and not resisting and fighting it. And they always say that the sound gets so much quieter when they don't resist it, when they accept that that's happening. So similar theory can be applied to the process of change as well. So that's one thing that's helpful. And you'll have seen this a lot when we were in the midst of the pandemic around, think about what you're able to control and what's in your control. And really what's behind that is that when we feel anxious, most of the time it's because we feel out of control. That's when our environment becomes threatening. That's why we find change so difficult. So feeling out of control brings high anxiety. So as psychologists or therapists, what we do when people feel highly anxious or out of control is bring them back to what they can control. And that's immediately bringing people into a calming state. And we've covered a little bit. Number 4 for building the skills is the internal dialogue. What is our internal dialogue? Please just spend the next week being aware of it. being aware of those thoughts that are going through your mind on a daily basis before doing challenging tasks, and notice what they're saying to you, because we often do it without being consciously aware. We're sort of in autopilot with things, but when we actually just slow down a little bit and listen to some of our internal dialogue, it can be really unhelpful for us, and we can find ways to reframe it. And then our last top tip of the day for the Building Resilience seminar is about habits. And I'm sure some of you will have heard of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the book that Stephen Covey wrote. In this book is a really important habit that we can do when we're thinking about resilience at work, and it's simply putting first things first, prioritizing what really matters. So we have a quadrant on the slide previously, yeah. So we should have a quadrant of expectations where these are habits of resilient people. So habits of resilient people is, if something is important and it's urgent, then we should do it there and then. That goes in the do box. But if something's important and not urgent, we often spend our time on the urgents and have too many urgents and too many do's in our list. So what we really need to think about is, if something is urgent and important and it's falling into that category, and we have too many things in that list, right? Why are there too many things in that list, and how can we schedule our time so that we have things in the important box but the non-urgent box, because we need time to adequately plan. So when in a high state of anxiety, are there any steps to regroup and align with resilience? Yeah, absolutely. And there's different recommendations of advice that people follow when they're in high states of anxiety, and sometimes that can depend on the underlying trigger. However, there's one thing that we can all do that categorically works, because it's a science. And so the reason that breathing works for bringing down our anxiety, because what happens when we feel anxious, so we're observing a threat in our environment, that might be a real threat or a perceived threat, and we're also in a state of, it could be that we're feeling out of control in a situation. So our heart rate speeds up, our blood starts pumping around our body really, really fast. We can become shaky, we can become, actually our palms can become very sweaty, our voices can become shaky. So it's actually a physiological response. And so we need to slow that physiology down. And the way we do that is bringing our heart rate down. This is why so many people actually advocate for just in the moment simple breathing exercises. There's so many different ones available online, and as part of these breathing exercises, you can do them in the office, in the moment, in a meeting, and nobody will really notice. There's one breathing exercise where you look at a window and you follow in the pattern of the window. So if you start at the bottom, obviously you won't necessarily use your finger, but for the purposes of demonstrating, you breathe in as you follow the bottom of the window, or it could be a door. Breathe in, just focus on it with your eyes, usually till about 4, and then hold as you follow in with your eyes up the frame, and then breathe out as you come down. So that is just a simple thing we can do to bring our body back into a calm state. And thank you. That it's a really good question. Other than breathing, there are things you can do other than breathing. Breathing is the main one that is, of course, backed by science. But if you're in an anxious state and you want to align back with resilience, one thing you can do psychologically, aside from breathing, is actually take yourself back to a time where you accomplished something. where you felt really happy. One question that we don't always ask ourselves is, when was the time you felt happy and what was going on for you then? So actually taking ourselves back to a positive experience psychologically, that also helps to bring down anxiety levels as well.
So I just wanted to mention that one of the features that most people don't actually realize exists on the Core Direction application is actually breathwork practice. We've got two types of breathwork practice on the app itself. One is resonance breathing and one is box breathing. So the box breathing is exactly as you mentioned. So inhale for kind of 5, hold for 5, exhale for kind of 5, and then hold for 5. So that's one of the breathwork practices. And then the other one is resonance breathing. So it's basically 5-second inhale, 5-second exhale. And the app itself has the timers on it. You can set up intervals of 3 minutes. So you can set up between 3, 6, 12, 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15-minute intervals to run through your breathwork practice. And then it also rewards you with streaks for every day that you do a breathwork practice. And you can also add in some sounds behind it. So while you're doing your breathwork practice, you can listen to mountain stream or a sound bowl or just have it in silence. So just for those of you that are on the core and that want to take some of that very good advice of reducing stress and anxiety through breathwork practice, the Core Direction app has that feature. And obviously, as most of you will know, the app is available on Apple Store and Google Play Store as well. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. A great talk. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And these things are really helpful to bringing us into calm states, and also gives us a sense of control. In terms of the exercise for reflection that we have for you, what we'll do, just for time, because I wanted to make sure that you could ask any questions you wanted to, is we'll email you out the quadrant box. And what your activity will be to do, honestly, this will be so helpful, if you give it a go, is you need to prioritize in the boxes what is urgent and important, what is important but not urgent, what is not urgent and not important. And so by this you can find out what it is that you can eliminate, and what we're actually wanting from this exercise is, okay, if everything is urgent and important, what can we do about that? Because that's when we're in a state of stress. How can we make sure we have more things in important but not urgent? Because that means we have time to respond, to plan, to coordinate, to build those relationships. So we'll send you the details of that exercise, because I'd really like you to spend a little bit of time on it, so you can set it up for potentially what your week looks like next week. And it's really interesting and a reflective exercise to see where you could build more resilience into your week.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Kayleigh, and always a pleasure to hear you speak and share your wisdom. And resilience is such an important topic too, but we will do that. We will email out the exercise. I'm sorry for that, it got missed in the presentation. But along with the email, what we're also going to be emailing you is a very quick and short screener, and that'll allow you to identify your own level of resilience as well. So look out for the email, and the video will also go out in the email, so you can rewatch this if you want. And for those of you who were here last week, we did send an email out, so please do check your spam and all of the different inboxes that everyone has nowadays to see if you received an email from Chearful, because we did the same thing. We sent out the video, as well as we sent out a very short anxiety screener that allows you to identify your levels of anxiety and give you a few recommendations and tips in terms of what you can do with it. So thank you very much, Kayleigh. Thank you, Clef. And thank you all for joining us today. And we hope we'll see you.
Team. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. And we hope we'll see you guys next week. Next week is a Finding Purpose and Meaning session. Same time. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.